Hello, everyone. So I am not in class, and I'm imagining you're not either. So I wasn't able to get a substitute for class, and so I am just going to continue talking about the psychology of pricing. Something we kind of opened the door for the last couple times that we've met, and to review a little bit, we talked about did a couple exercises that were hopefully convincing to you that it is really hard to know what something costs or what something should cost. And so one example we did was the necktie exercise, where you all estimated within a range of prices what the price of a boss necktie should be. And prior to that, half of the students had estimates of what textbooks cost, and you were right. If you remember the exercise, you put what you thought a textbook likely cost, and you were given a range. And when the range for textbooks was higher, then people put higher estimates for what the necktie would cost. And the point of that experience or that exercise was to just reinforce this idea that it's really hard to know what something should cost. For the most part, people don't have a great memory for pricing things. And while I mentioned that, I might as well just mention this study, which is they asked people, went around in grocery stores, and they asked people to estimate the price of the last thing they put in their carts. And not surprisingly, people weren't particularly good at estimating. And just to be specific about it, 47% of people were off by more than 20%. So were they wrong? Well, yeah, I mean, we wouldn't expect people to get it down to the penny, right? So how far off? So 20% plus or minus is what we're considering close enough, and fewer than half of people um, were able to recall close enough to what something actually cost. So, so don't have a great memory for it. What we think something should cost is easily changed and manipulated. That's um, what the necktie exercise is supposed to show. Um, and then and then the wine on the beach example. So if you recall, people had a hypothetical situation, and I believe that this is in your other set of notes. Um, but so they so the option is, well, there's two different versions of this, and one is you're gonna go buy some wine from a cheap store and then consume it on the beach, or you're gonna go to the nice hotel and consume it on the beach. And um, and then you're asked to estimate what's the most you'd be willing to pay, and it turns out that the location has a lot to say in terms of what's the most you're willing to pay, right? And of course that doesn't make logical sense, because you're not going to consume it in the hotel or in the rundown grocery store, right? So all of this is to kind of paint the idea that people's conceptions of what something can and should cost are variable and can change pretty easily. So the last concept to mention here is price clustering, which is this idea that we tend not to have a good sense for specifically what things cost, which hopefully I've convinced you of that at this point. Price clustering is the idea that we have vague categories for what things should cost, like, for instance, $100. So if I were to ask you what's something that costs $100, you might have some things that kind of broadly fit into that category. And this is partly why that marketing is effective, because people don't know, they don't carry a strong sense of exactly what something should cost, and so we're apt to be persuaded by a lot of different things in terms of what things actually do cost. So it's kind of within the context of understanding that people don't really know what things cost, that we're going to talk about anchoring and reference prices. Um, these are similar terms, anchoring and reference prices. So um, anchoring is the phenomenon where we rely heavily on the first piece of information about pricing that we get. So um, and this really is something that the first bit of information you get about what something should cost uh, exerts a tremendous influence on your mind in terms of what you're willing to pay, right? Um, and so anchoring um, is providing a specific first piece of information in terms of what something could cost. So, and you can think about this in a couple different ways. One is um, here's here's the price anchor. This is what our competitors charge. Well, we charge twice that because we deliver so much more, right? That's one way to conceive of it. And that's using a price anchor, and then you kind of upset the expectations around that. That's one way to do it. Another way, and most common way, is to say, here's what you would expect to pay, um, or here's a reference price or an anchor, and we're gonna charge you less than that. Um, So again, to be clear, ref, all of reference prices are a type of anchoring. Anchoring is the general practice of people relying heavily on the first bit of information they get about pricing information. Reference price is something that marketers determine or seek to impose as a kind of anchor. And you'll recognize these, right? So strike through pricing is a type of reference price that you'll see all the time, right? And so I don't know what this is advertising for 12.99, but you get to strike through on 13.99, and it seems like a better deal. Same with these other ones here, where you have the reference price, it's struck through, and then you're left with the sense that you're possibly getting a good deal. And again, I mentioned all of that stuff up front about the neckties and so forth because we typically don't carry around numbers of prices in our minds, and so we rely on these shortcuts to see if something is a good price. And I say that framed as a consumer. On the marketing side, because customers don't come in with the firm sense of what something should cost, a reference price is a good way at signaling to them that they could be getting a good price on something. I saw this ad, kind of interesting. This is on how to create strike-through pricing on Amazon, right? Because people typically, unless you're in one of very few industries, people don't come to you with a sure sense of what something should cost, right? A pair of running shoes, a gallon of gas, and a bag of chips. Most people are not going to be really close. They're not going to be within 20% on any one of those prices. And so anchoring and reference prices help set that expectation, and then you gauge whether you're getting a good deal or not um, once you see the reference price. A couple examples of reference prices, of course, um, MSRP, or manufacturer's suggested retail price. That's a common reference price. Progressive, I don't know if they're still doing this, but they uh, would post or would make it visible what competitors' quotes would be for you. Not sure if they still do that, but that's a good example of a reference price. Um, this is a little old, but I think it's and also ridiculous. Um, here are these videos that are 119 now only 19. Um, Kind of ridiculous, but it makes the point that people don't know if they're getting a good deal unless for most things, unless you insert a reference price from which they're going to judge whether they're getting a good deal on this product or not. So uh, at sort of an intuitive level, as I mentioned, people don't have a firm sense for what something should cost or what it ought to cost. And if I were to ask you, what is a 16.2 ounce box of cinnamon toast crunch cost? I'm sure this is low because this is like from a year or two ago, so it's probably $4 right now. So doubt I doubt anyone nailed it, but it's really unlikely that anyone said $1 or anyone said $27, right? We have some sense for what things, a range of prices that things might cost. And you could consider that an internal reference price, which is just at an intuitive level, what something, what's a reasonable price for something. And like $27 for Cinnamon Toast Crunch is probably not there. Um, so that's what you might call an internal reference price. But external is much more commonly used. And so just to use some 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 vocabulary here, great value is a private label brand. That is Walmart is right. We all know that's a Walmart brand. The correct term for that is a private label brand. And again, if the Great Value Cinnamon Crunch is 250, it's hard to know if that's a good price or not. And so they don't typically have these prices next together in advertising, but they do in the store. It's really common, right? If you're trying to find Great Value Cinnamon Crunch, you're going to find it almost always next to the name brand so that you can compare the prices, right? Because it's not clear if 250 is a good value or a great value, um, if you don't have anything to compare it to, right? And that's the virtue of a reference price. And then so restaurants do this kind of thing. Most popular here are a couple of things that you might consider, and that you might consider buying. These are most popular, and it's not just the menu items that they're asking you to reference, it's the price of those, right? So that you can kind of judge on the rest of the menu how things relate to their kind of key items. And into all this, hopefully this is something that you're familiar with, the kind of famous J.C. Penney thing. So J.C. Penney was known to I think it's okay to say they abused the reference price, the MSRP reference price approach to sales, where they would once in a while have these really aggressive sales and things would be marked down dramatically, and customers really liked that. Um, However, some folks in JCPenney management were, as JCPenney was not thriving, looking to make a turnaround. They thought, well, this is a little manipulative because we're increasing the prices temporarily. We get it at a high price, and then we mark it down dramatically, and it's all kind of a game. Let's just be a little more straightforward with our customers and just keep things at a reasonable price. So we're doing away with the big sales and the dramatic price cuts, and we're just going to focus on delivering a fair value for everything that we sell. And if you heard it in a boardroom or you hear it in a class, maybe that sounds like a really good idea. And I actually don't think it was a bad idea, but it turned out to have been a bad idea because that's just not what the customers from JCPenney wanted. And this turned out to be one of the more dramatic marketing mistakes that has been observed in the past, I'd say 20 years or so. It was a disaster. They had to back it up, and now they do what they've always done, which is high-low pricing. They might temporarily increase the price temporarily so that they can offer a steep discount from that point, and people feel good about spending the new amount. Um, yeah, so that's an example of reference pricing. Another phenomenon that gets a fair amount of pricing is what's called charm pricing, and I don't know the term charm pricing is not used everywhere, but it's good to have a term for it. So this is where um, you leave everything in 99 or 95, right? And it's good to at least have some words or language around it. So it is called charm pricing. And does it work? Um, it does. It definitely does seem to work. And one, I think, explanation for it is what's called the left digit effect, which is you tend to focus on the leftmost digit. There's kind of two things going on, and I'll explain to the best of my understanding what's going on here. People can mathematically tell you that 9.99 is a penny below $10 and that it's a functionally $10. Um, However, this left digit effect does seem to work um, at a level of processing that isn't numeric. So when you're thinking about, am I getting a good deal or not? If you're not putting it strictly into numbers, it seems like the left digit effect seems to work a little bit. It's a little bit like uh, there's some research on flattery, and when people are in a position of power, people will often flatter them. And those who are flattered will both recognize that it's flattery and also it seems to work on them, right? And so I would say that charm pricing is a little bit similar. People know that there's an element of manipulation going on when the price is, 9.99, 2.99, whatever. They recognize that there's an element of manipulation, but they tend to undercorrect for it, or that left digit just exerts more um, what's the word, influence in your mind than the other numbers do. So charm pricing, big picture, seems to work within some context, right? I went to, this is Sephora, just to see how they price their perfumes. And as you can see, this is not charm pricing. And part of the reason is um, when you get the 99 and the 95 at the end, it does send the signal that it is not a premium product. It is a discounted product. And so you're unlikely to see premium perfumes, premium products in general that end with a 99 or a 95, right? So just whole numbers speak to a different type of selling where you're not apologetic about what you're charging. And like perfume would be a good example, like a high-end perfume would be a good example of that. And I saw this recently and thought it was ridiculous. So, oh dang it, here we are. So 115-inch TV, uh, it is $19,997.99, but it's on sale for $2 off, and so it's down to 19,999. Oh, sorry, it's down to 19. Whatever, you get the point. Save $2 off a $20,000 TV. Um, I don't think that it makes sense for this to be charm priced, right? $20,000, just put 20,000 for a premium product like this. It makes a lot more sense. Now TCL is a little, they're a bargain brand, but this particular model is a premium model, so it's not clear. It's not clear that this should be either charm or not charm pricing, but I did want to show you this ridiculous advertisement. Now, the endowment effect is an interesting phenomenon. I'll just define it here. People value a good or an object more once their property right to it has been established, or once they own it. And there are a couple different ways. So let me just, there's the definition. Let me just offer maybe a different interpretation of that. What people's attitudes about things change dramatically once they own them, or once they have kind of taken psychological ownership of something. So if you want to know the difference between owning something and psychological ownership, test driving a car, right? Is if it's something that you like, it's that process of going from I don't own this to I do own this. It's not, it's legally when it's signed, but psychologically that process kind of happens over time. So you're test driving it, you like it, and you're beginning to take psychological ownership of it at that point, right? And so you think about it differently at that point than you did previously. So just to kind of stick with this example, if you're test driving a car and you don't like it, you don't care that somebody else is in line to test drive it as well. But if you do like it, you start to take psychological ownership of it, then you're not going to want somebody else test driving it, right? And that's sort of an example, that your psychological ownership of something is more of a process than it is just a quick act. And the idea is that once you own something, you think about the value, both in terms of what it does and in terms of the price, differently. So, and there's kind of a famous study done on business school students, and what they did was they um, gave, I'm trying to remember the study, they gave half of the business school students in a particular class a mug, and they said, this mug is yours. What is the least you would be willing to sell it for? So you can sell it to anyone else in the class. Give us the lowest price at which you'd be willing to let this go. Okay, same class, same group of students, shift over to the group that didn't get the mugs. The question was, if someone were to sell this to you, what is the most you would conceivably spend on this mug? So similar groups, the main distinction is you have a group that received the mug, and they're contemplating what is the most the least they would be willing to pay, the least they would be willing to accept to give up that mug. And a group without a mug who are thinking what's the most they would be willing to pay in order to buy a mug off of someone in their class. And you see, so median seller reservation price, you were given the mug, it's yours. What is the least you would be willing um, to 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 receive in order to part with it? What's the least payment you would accept in order to sell the mug? That's 525. And in that same class, the most people would be willing to pay to buy a mug um, that someone else in the class owns is 225. So the endowment effect is probably most evident in like free trials, that kind of thing, where you allow people to experience the benefits of the product, um, and before paying for them, right? And so test drive is a good example of this. So are free trials. Those are good examples um, of the endowment effect, where once you have something, the value that you consider that it provides is greater than before you took ownership of it, even if ownership here is not actual legal ownership, just like physical custody of something. uh oh shoot, Well, I'm gonna pause this here and fix that slide. All right, so this is a good example of the endowment effect. This is actually probably the best example of the endowment effect I can imagine. So there were some researchers at Duke University. Duke is a good basketball school, and there's a lot of interest in attending their home games. So much so that they can't give everyone who wants a ticket, and so they have a lottery system so that people can get a ticket. So what they did was these researchers they went to people who were waiting in line to get a ticket, um, and asked them. Um, well, they just got their information right because what was going to happen next is by random assignment, some of them would actually get the tickets, and some of them wouldn't get the tickets. And hopefully, if you've been following the argument here about what the endowment effect is, you would have a sense for how that would change the value that they placed on those tickets. So again, everybody in line is trying to get tickets to a Duke home game. So by random assignment, so they've got the names of everybody who's not everybody, but good portion of people in line. Then by random assignment, they're randomly, some of them get the actual tickets and others don't. And they followed up with them and they said, for those who actually got the tickets, what is, like the mugs, what is the least you'd be willing to sell this for? What's the smallest amount of compensation you would accept to give these up, right? When you've got something. And then the other group was the group that didn't get the tickets was asked the other question, which is, what's the most you would be willing to pay to actually get those tickets? And there was a huge difference in what people were willing to pay. So those who didn't get the tickets, on average, the most they'd be willing to pay was $150. For those who did get the tickets, the most they'd be willing to sell is 20. The least they'd be willing to sell them for was $2,400. And so you have a group where everybody started out identical. And by random assignment, some got the tickets and some didn't. And of because of receiving the tickets, taking ownership of something, it caused or not, it caused a huge change in what people thought these things were worth. And so the least they'd be willing to sell it for was 2,400. The most they'd be willing to buy it for was 150. There's a couple of different ways to think about the endowment effect. We've talked about loss aversion to some extent. This is consistent with loss aversion that people dread a loss of something more than the equivalent of that thing would bring joy if they were to receive it, right? In other words, loss aversion is um, we consider the downsides of a loss greater than the equivalent gain brings us happiness, right? Um, so that's kind of philosophically, or it kind of connects to the idea of loss aversion. Um, and just to illustrate an example of this, a while ago, I did something where students had a bunch of bonus points, and they would lose those bonus points when they would turn things in late. And it seems like students are more careful to safeguard bonus points than they would be, say, you get a bonus point for every time you turn something in early, right? There's just the way we're built is to avoid losses more than it is to promote gains. So reluctance to trade or sell possessions. I think, and I'm not in real estate, but my sense is the endowment effect is really a common problem in real estate that people, they're attached especially to their homes. And so when it comes time to sell their home, they don't look at the market they kind of look at their feelings about their home, right, and their attachment to it, and that causes people to irrationally overprice their own pro- um, goods, and in particular homes. This could be the case for cars too, especially if a car or truck, somebody feels really emotional about it, right? They're attached to it. The endowment effect is such that they are not going to be considering really the market for the product and thinking more of what that loss would mean for them individually and pricing that accordingly. And this is so difficulty in objectively valuing owned items. I think that's the case with, like I said, cars and houses. Can also have an influence on pricing strategies and marketing tactics. So a couple examples. Of course, we mentioned test drive, which is a good example of endowment effect. Another example is, phone companies will typically charge, or not charge, they typically give you quite a bit for a relatively new device. And part of that, I think, is to kind of upset your attachment to a good functioning device that you may have bought in the last couple 2 or 3 years, right? It's still functioning well. um, and so, but a big dollar amount for a trade-in can help kind of overcome the tendency to want to cling on to that object. um, Customizations is another example of this. When you customize something, you make it more your own, and then that would tend to increase the value that you attach to it. Subscriptions are also, I think, similar to this, where um, you I don't know what it's like for college students on a budget, um, but most people who pay for streaming services have a lot more streaming services than they actually could ever use. And and part of the reason for that is people are reluctant to give up something that they might stream, even if they're not. There's nothing that's really on that channel that they're really into. You don't want to give up the option of streaming something on that service, and so people tend to uh, keep subscriptions for maybe longer than would otherwise make sense.